Are you ready to unleash your full potential and become unstoppable in your success and leadership?
Welcome to the Unleashed and Unstoppable podcast, where we provide powerful insights and strategies for coaches, corporate leaders, and entrepreneurs. I'm Alexanne Carter.
And I'm Carol Register, and we're certified master neurocoaches who are passionate about helping you overcome your limiting beliefs and optimize your performance.
Each week, we'll be sharing actionable tips and strategies using neuroscience, from interviews with industry experts to solo episodes, to help you lead a life of power, purpose, and possibility on your own terms.
Join our community of like-minded individuals. Hit subscribe now, and let's be unleashed and unstoppable together.
Hey, leader. Wow, I can't believe in 4 years of doing this podcast, this is the very first podcast that I will be doing solo. Carol is traveling at the moment, and, the show must go on, right? So I said, you know what? Why don't I record a solo episode today? So I'm really excited to be here with you and just celebrating. We are almost halfway through the year 2026. And, this has been a big year for me with Free to Be Me, and for Carol as well with her retreats and the amount of speaking opportunities and interviews that she's been doing. And so it's just, it's always a beautiful invitation to pause and acknowledge ourselves for where we have, come in the year up until now, and really reset ourselves into obviously what we're up to creating, right? In the second half of the year. And I speak a lot about, and what I'm speaking so much into lately, with Free to Be Me, is how we just don't lose confidence overnight. And I really want to lean into that, with the topic of this episode being, right, we don't lose confidence overnight, we unlearn it, because this is something I'm really passionate about. I have recently been working at my daughter's school here in Panama at Manglares Discovery School, and it's just been really fascinating, really seeing the little ones on the playground, working with the teenagers, and just multiple interactions that I have with many of the children around this area, right? And it's really this concept of really that I believe, through my experience as a mom, as a neuro coach, as a teacher, educator, that we don't lose confidence overnight. We unlearn it, right? And I really sit with this sentence, and it's been sitting with me for a long time. I mean, that's really where Free to Be Me was born. It was because it wasn't something where I read it somewhere. It wasn't necessarily something I learned when I did my neuro coaching certificate. It really has come from observing my kids, right? I have two young daughters, right? Amelia just turned 3. Abby is 6 this summer. And it's those everyday moments, right, that I witness, I experience, being like with the children at the school, being with my own kids, being with the kids around the neighborhood, all the multiple different sports that Abby's involved in, right? And just watching, how they learn, how they grow, and how they experience the world around them. And the more time I sit there and watch them and look and observe them, compared to, the work I'm doing in coaching with adults, or even just working with teenagers, it's really about noticing that it's not necessarily, it's what happening with the comments that we're born with. It's also noticing, like, with adults, like they tend to carry so much self-doubt. And it's just been a big question I've always been curious about, and sort of studying of, like, what exactly happens, right? Because when I look at my daughters, right, and I look at many of the children around here, I don't see self-doubt, right? I don't see limiting beliefs. I don't see imposter syndrome. I don't see fear of judgment. I see curiosity, right? I see curious. I see curious. Well, that's a tongue twister. I see courage. Courage. I'm going to say the word in French. I see courage. I see persistence. I see willingness to try new things, right? Like, time and time again with my daughter, especially being here in Panama, there's multiple opportunities to try new things, and watching her with this grit and resiliency and without this fear. I mean, even just watching her on the mat in jiu-jitsu, like she blows my mind. I'm so proud of her as a mom, but also she really is such a beautiful example of just not having that fear kind of block her from wanting to try something new. And I just see this again and again and again. And I see this so much in these young kids. And then something changes, right? I mean, obviously, I work with so many high performers, and I realize that something really does change. And so, kind of just been so curious about looking at this and studying this, right? So, yeah, for many years now, I've been working with high performers and leaders and entrepreneurs and teachers and professionals, right, who have achieved some amazing, incredible things. And yet, beneath the surface, I often hear the same kind of thoughts, right? I'm not ready. What if I fail? What if I'm not qualified enough? What will people think of me? What if I'm not good enough, right? And there's this like comparinitis that happens, and this imposter syndrome, and these fears, and all this self-doubt, right? And so, especially having worked so much with high performers and then becoming a mom, I've just been so fascinated in studying, like, really, like, where do these beliefs come from, right? Because no one is really born believing these things, right? A newborn baby doesn't arrive into the world wondering whether they're worthy. A toddler doesn't worry about looking foolish, right? A young child doesn't hesitate to dance because someone might judge them. Those fears, they come later on. So where exactly do they come from, right? And that's where I find that my daughters are my greatest teachers, because I really watch and I observe them, and I get curious of, like, where does this all change, right? If we think about a child learning to walk, right? If we really, really think about it, they stand up, they wobble, right? They fall. Sometimes they may cry. Sometimes they may get frustrated. But the reality is they get back up and they try again. I remember when Abby first learned to walk, I was convinced. I remember she took like our first couple steps, and it was like end of June, July. And I was convinced, I'm like, oh my goodness, this girl's gonna be walking within weeks. But what was like her 13th month birthday. So this would have been later in August, or no, sorry, in September. That's when she learned to walk. So like that was almost a 2-month process when I was convinced that she was going to be walking, pretty soon after she took, I think it was like 5 steps. And yet it took until she was 13 months old for her to really take off. And so you think about that, right? You think about the time and the commitment and the determination and the process that it took for her to get from those very first steps to confidently walking with ease, and and has not stopped running and walking since then, right? And here's the thing, what's fascinating is that they don't make falling mean anything, right? When we think about falling or think about failing, I've always defined it as the first attempt in learning, because they don't fall down and think maybe walking wasn't just for me or isn't for me. There's no concept there, right? Where they experience something that was challenging. They don't compare themselves to the child next door. They don't decide that they're behind. Those are things that you hear as adults are talking when maybe a child isn't walking by a certain age, right? Those are beliefs that we're hearing from adults. It's not the child that is feeling that, right? They don't create a story about failure or them not being good enough at walking. They simply try again. They understand the goal, and they understand that they want to achieve that, and they just get up and do it again, right? It's not identity. They don't let it mean something about them. They just stay committed to the fact that they want to learn to walk. And I think this is one of the biggest lessons that our children have to teach us, right? And it's not just with walking. I mean, we can go back to crawling. We can look at them learning to eat, right? I mean, Amelia is potty training right now, and it's a process, and it's a commitment. And, we don't get upset because we have a little accident. No, it's like accidents happen. Let's try again. We revisit the lesson. We have the books, we have the teddies, we have the things to support her in training the brain, right? And training the body and the brain to be able to learn to use the potty and to think about, okay, I need to go to the bathroom, and the timing of it, right? Of being connected to our body, and then listening to our body, and then making sure that we, head to the bathroom before having the accident, right? And so it's just been, those reminders again, even through the body training process of being committed, and us as, parents being patient with her, right? As she is learning this new skill. But yet, somewhere along the way, right? We as adults, we stopped, well, I say as adults, but there's somewhere along the way, right? From the moment that our children are young, or we were young up until adulthood, that we stopped treating experiences as information, right? We start treating them as evidence, or at least our brain starts treating these events as evidence, right? Evidence that we're not smart enough, right? That we're not capable enough, that we're not enough. And our brain notices these patterns, and they start making, all these events mean something, right? And so now the brain is starting to wire in these different beliefs based on what we've experienced, what we heard, right? I gave the example earlier about the walking piece, right? How many times we're even communicating, how many times are people set expectations that children should be walking by a certain age, or children should be potty trained by a certain age, or children should start talking at a certain age. Where did that come from? Because every child is different. Every child is unique. Every child learns at their own different pace, right? And even having conversations, with parents around, even, with some of the kids at school, when it comes to learning to read or write. I always remember in school, it was like, it's kind of a conversation that by grade 3, usually certain skills would sort of iron themselves out, right? Because children just learn at different pace. And so because they learn at different paces, a lot of, schools or testing doesn't want to be down when children are super young, because they just might learn a little bit, quote unquote, slower than others, right? But it doesn't mean that by the end of grade 2 or grade 3, they haven't, quote unquote, again, I'm using words that I've heard before, caught up, right? It's just that kids learn at different paces, brain development is different, kids have different interests, and it all depends on the learning experience, right? And it's just fascinating, right? To sort of see that again, conversation of people around of like, what are these expectations that people are setting? So I want you to imagine this for a second, right? Imagine 2 people learning something new. One is a toddler and one is an adult. The toddler falls, but the adult says they fail. The toddler says, let me try again. The adult says, maybe I'm not cut out for this. Same moment, different meaning. And that distinction matters, because our lives are often shaped less by what happens to us and more by what makes us let me say this again, because it's important that we understand this, right? So our lives often are shaped less by what happens to us. It's more about what we make those moments and experiences mean, right? So it's less what happens and more about what we make those experiences mean. So again, with the child, right? Toddler falls, they get back up, they start again. Adult fails, quote unquote, and it's, I'm not cut out for this, I'm not good enough. Same event, different outcome, right? And this is where the work as a neuroscientist and like what Carol and I do, right? We really look at like, how is somebody showing up with their identity and their belief system, right? A toddler has no other prior experiences. And really, when we think about it, when they're learning to walk, to quote unquote compare from, right? For them and just their biology, it's like, this is the next step, right? If they have older siblings, they're like, oh, wow, my older sibling, brother or sister can move faster than me. Motivation to want to figure out how to walk, right? So there's this motivation to do that, but they just know it's part of the learning process, right? They just, their bodies are just built like that because they don't have any prior experiences, right? That are telling them something different. But time and time again through experiences, right? Then we make things mean about this. And eventually when we become adults, we are tying meaning that we aren't good enough. And we have all these limiting beliefs about it. And we compare ourselves to other people versus the whole piece of, right? Like really believing in ourselves from the get-go and just understanding like, you know what? Sometimes we do fall and we can get back up. Because when we look at children, they got back up. How many times? I can tell you with Abby, it was multiple times over and over again, right? And now, right, you go from running to skipping, to, walking, to skipping, to jumping, to running, to climbing, to, all these additional like sports or movement that requires this foundation and building blocks, right? And that's why I say like our kids are our biggest teachers, because we can really think about that when we watch them and we watch their determination. I feel like it's just been fascinating for me to take that pause and be so curious to look at this like deeper, really, especially with the amount of high performance I've worked with, and just seeing how much they hold themselves back and they play small and they don't put themselves out there. But yet, once upon a time, they did. Now, I do want to be careful here, because from a neuroscience perspective, right, children aren't fully born with a fully developed sense of worth, right? They're born wired for connection. They're born wired for safety, and they're born wired to belong, right? We talk about this often on the podcast, right? Really talking about those, the three roots, right? And the brains depend on this. So in those early years, right, children are constantly gathering information about themselves around the world around them, right? So am I safe? Do I matter? Can I trust the people around me? Am I accepted? Do I belong? And the answers they receive become the foundation for the beliefs they carry into adulthood. This is why it's so important when we think about our children and the conversation we're having with them and how we're raising them. Now, not because anyone intentionally teaches them, right? It's just because the human brain is always learning and it's always adapting, right? We talk a lot about the neuroplasticity, and it's always creating meaning, because the brain uses a lot of energy. It uses a lot of it's escaping right now. A lot of glucose. There we go. It's always, it uses a lot of glucose. And to preserve energy, the brain is always scanning and trying to make patterns, right? So that instead of having to overwork all the time using all this glucose, it's looking for these patterns to not have to work so hard. And that's why it looks for this repetitiveness and tries to condense it so that it saves the energy. Now, one of the things that inspired my book, Free to Be Me, was noticing how powerful language can be, right? As parents, as teachers, as leaders, as human beings, words matter, right? Learning how to walk or doing something for the first time. Child falls and gets back up and tries again. Adult is, I'm not good enough. I'm not cut out for this. This isn't meant for me, right? Words matter. Words matter. And not because children remember every sentence, but because they remember how those words made them feel. A thought fires an emotion, and that becomes the belief. So over time, those feelings become beliefs, right? And those beliefs become the identity. And when it's repeated over and over again, right? Brain trying to reserve energy, trying to reserve the glucose, is noticing patterns. And these where these beliefs are formed, impacts identity, how we show up. So when a child hears, be careful 1,000 times, right? Be careful over and over again. Eventually, they may learn that the world is dangerous. Or a child hears, don't make mistakes. And eventually, they may learn that mistakes are something to fear. A child hears, good job, only when they achieve something. And eventually, they may learn that their value is tied to performance. And again, none of this is intentional, right? That's the thing. This is why it's so deep when it comes to the work that I'm doing with Free to Be Me, because, so I'm going to say that again, because I know I sometimes say my book title so quickly, and I know even on social, it'll like it won't say the name of the book. My book is Free to Be Me. And the reason why I'm speaking into this and why this topic is I'm so passionate about it is because, right, none of this is intentional. We are going to parent, you're going to parent, I'm going to parent, you're going to show up based on the subconscious programming. What's going to come out of your mouth automatically without you even thinking about it, right? Their neurons fire so quickly is based on what you heard as a child growing up, because the brain made a pattern and now it's just automatically coming out of your brain as well. And so most parents are doing the best that they can, right? You're not intentionally trying to say program certain types of beliefs in your children. You want the best for them, right? I mean, most teachers are the same thing. They're doing the best that they can, but I've seen this. I mean, having spent almost 20 years in education, that and in my role in particular, which is what's so fascinating, because this is where I started to notice like the breakdown in trying to implement change in schools, is that teachers will show up and they'll teach the way that they were taught. And so to instill change in school systems requires years of changes, because again, we're going to show up and we're going to teach the students and use strategies that were used when we were students, or you were a student, right? And it's not that it's quote unquote wrong, but when we really study how children learn best, same thing as children, we realize that all of those strategies might have worked, however many years ago, but they just don't work now. They don't serve our children, not in today's society. And again, I feel like this is a whole topic for another day, right? But it's just, again, looking at human behavior and thought and belief system and identity, right? So most of us are simply repeating what we learned ourselves, right? And this is why I believe that the awareness of this really, really matters, because when we can consciously be aware of how we show up with our identity and our belief system, we can consciously make different decisions, take different actions, and create different results in our children and the people that are around us. So, my kids are, so what, Abby's almost 6, and they just turned 3. And I mean, obviously I've been reading children's literature to my kids for several years now, and, listening to children's music. But one day I was sitting on the floor with my daughters, and, I consciously became aware that I kept changing the words of the books that I was reading to my kids, right? I'd read a sentence, I'd pause, I'd say it differently. Sometimes I wouldn't even read the full sentence out loud. And it wasn't because the book was wrong. It's just because something didn't feel aligned with the words I was saying. Because as a neuro coach, I'm very aware of the words that our children are hearing, right? And so I have this heightened awareness of the words and how things are being said. I even noticed that on Amelia's diapers, it said something about being busy, right? And I know, having worked with so many high performers who burn out, what leads to the burnout is the fact that they're just constantly busy because they don't know what it's like to not be busy, which I'll talk more in my next episode about, slowing down and not being quote unquote, so busy all the time, right? And so because I was spending so much time, just being more intentional with the words I was reading to them, something felt like I was sort of subtly teaching a lesson to my kids, right? When I was so aware of the words. And then I realized something, right? That stories shape beliefs, words shape beliefs, experience shape beliefs, right? Exactly what I've been sharing. And if we're not paying attention to those beliefs, can become invisible rules that guide our lives. Rules that we never consciously chose. It's the subconscious. Because again, without people being aware of word choice or experiences, a lot of people go and they write literature, or they write children's songs, or they write children's shows, and they're not really aware of this because, again, this is what they heard as a child, and they will write based on their experiences. So as I watched my daughters grow, I kept asking myself, what happens between these fearless little humans? Because this is what I hear all the time about Abby. It's like, Abby is so fearless. She's so fearless, right? And the adult sitting in my coaching chair, or you listener, who's afraid to raise their hand, afraid to speak the truth, afraid to start the business, afraid to write the book, afraid to take the chance, afraid to make the move, right? What happens between the fearless 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old and now, and here where you are? And honestly, well, I don't think there's one answer, particularly. I do think there's a pattern, right? And little by little, we learn who we think we're supposed to be. Little by little, we learn what's acceptable based in society. And little by little, we learn how to fit in. Because remember, we want to feel safe. We want to feel loved. We want to feel worthy. We want to feel enough. And we want to feel loved and accepted. So this process, many of us, bugs around here. So in this process, right, many of us disconnect from who we really are, truly are at the core when we're born, because we've noticed experiences, we've felt things, and we've now conformed to sort of quote unquote fit in based on what we believe, what we perceive is allowing us to fit in, feel loved, feel accepted, feel safe, feel worthy and enough. So here's the good news. If confidence can be unlearned, then it can also be relearned. Not by becoming somebody new, but by returning to something we already know. Because when I watch children, I don't see perfection. I see authenticity, I see curiosity, I see resilience, I see presence, I see freedom. And maybe that's the invitation for all of us, not to become better, not to become more worthy, not to become enough, but just to remember who we really are. I shared a few months back about when I got Abby's first report card, and it brought joy and tears to my eyes. One, because it was so beautifully articulated about who Abby is as a person. It wasn't about the things that she did. It was truly about her as a person, celebrating her strengths, celebrating her areas of growth, celebrating who she is. And when I shared in celebration with my mom the report card, I was so curious, and I'm gonna, maybe many of you listening, right, that if you got children, you might be curious too, of like from your parents when you received your child's first report card, to see what the comparison was. And I'll never forget what my mom pointed out, about the kindness piece, the friendly piece, the social piece. But the thing that drove home or landed for me most was the fact that my mom said that I was creative. And that's what Abby's teacher said. And that's what I see in Abby. And yet, when my mom said that to me, I said, there's no way. There's no way. Because up until recently, I had a belief that I wasn't creative. Now, people, when I share this story, they look at me like, what are you talking about? You have a podcast, you wrote a book, you've written a blog, you've traveled, you've done photography, you love to sing, like all of these things that would make me creative. I'm a performer, I was an actress, I did cheer, like all of these things that require creativity. And yet I have this belief that I'm not creative. And so I would say that I feel like that contributed to me playing smaller and maybe being afraid to be seen as an author. I'll be honest with you, I really had to do a lot of work on myself to confidently show up and say that I'm declaring it, right? A best-selling children's author, right? Or an award children's author. Like I really, and even now, like there's a stumble in a little bit. I'm still getting used to that because I really, had this belief that I wasn't creative. And I still get to really unpack where that belief started, that I wasn't creative. But that's what I'm trying to say here, right? It's like you connecting with your very first report card, and how would your teacher describe you in your ways of being and the things that made you you. That's the freedom piece, right? To really remember who you already are, right? Outside of all the business and all the go and all the things that you're doing, who are you? Who are you being? Or sorry, let me think about this for a sec. Yeah, when you be you at your core, who are you? And this is why Free to Be Me is more than a children's book for me, right? It's a conversation. It's a reminder. It's a movement that asks a simple question. What if our job isn't to teach children who they become? Think about that, right? How many times is the question, what do you want to become when you're an adult? What do you want to study when you go to university? What do you want to become when you're older, right? It's always about this doing thing. What if your job, my job is to protect who they already are? Playful, love, caring, kind, fearless, loving, playful, creative, right? And what if in doing that, we rediscover parts of ourselves we've forgotten too. Because I don't think this conversation is only about children. I think it's about all of us. The child we once were, the dreams we stopped pursuing, the voice we stopped listening to, and the confidence we thought we lost. I want to leave you with this today. The next time you watch a child learn something new, I want to invite you to pause. Watch how they fall. Watch how they get back up. Watch how they try again without judgment, without shame, without questioning their worth. And then ask yourself, when did I stop doing that? Because we do not lose confidence overnight. No, we unlearn it. And perhaps the most important work we'll ever do is making sure we don't pass the pattern on to our children, to our students, to our teams, even to ourselves. Because when we really become connected to our belief system, our identity, how we're making our decisions, from what belief system, and the actions we're taking, the results we're generating, we can go back and look at, okay, where did this all change for me? Right? And maybe many of you might be invited to pull up or go through, if you've got places where you have things from when you're a kid, to like look at your very first report card to see what it said about yourself and to really reconnect with that, right? It's the invitation to connect with the inner child, to become more playful, right? To sit there and play Barbie dolls with your kids, kick the ball around, go play tag, go for a bike ride, go for swimming, do a big cannonball in the pool, right? And my invitation in those moments, and I really think this is what my action set for you today, right, is to really, in the next 24 hours or 24 to 48 hours, depending on when you listen to this, to really invite yourself to stretch into play, right? Be a kid again. Play with your kids. Sit down and maybe if they're into video games, play a video game with them, right? Lead with connection and curiosity. Bring the play back. Because I really feel like you'll discover something and maybe even sort of get the answer to the question of like, when did this all change? I don't think this changes overnight. I mean, I'm confident this doesn't change overnight. You're not just confident one moment and not confident. No, this is repetitive things that you felt or experienced, right? That you created a meaning, or your brain created a meaning that contributed, to your identity with this now thought system and belief system, which impacted how you showed up in decisions, actions, and results. So I'm super curious to really invite you to be curious about this and see and ask yourself, where did it all change? And maybe ask your parents, like, to describe you as a child. What were you like when you were in kindergarten? What were you like when you were starting elementary school or you were in preschool? Think about the activities you used to do on summer vacation. Because I know many of you are maybe already on summer vacation or you're heading into summer vacation. Bring back the joy, bring back the play, bring back your inner child. And I would love, 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 love to hear what opened up for you on today's podcast, things that you're realizing, and just that pause of reflection, right? To really rebirth your I like to call it for the kiddos, like they're free to be me moments, but your free to be moments where you totally felt unapologetically you, right? Super authentic, super like you're not trying to perform for anybody. You're literally in your zone, doing your thing, and not doing this for anybody else, not doing it for acceptance, for approval. You just got to like do your thing, and you were extremely happy. And just, the word that's coming to mind now is just lit up and being in that zone. So obviously, that I am, I've written Free to Be Me. We are almost complete with all the illustrations. And of course, still looking for sponsorship and support to really help the book get to publication, because now the illustration part is complete. And next steps obviously is to get it have it published so that you can get your hard copy come this fall. And so there's still additional investment pieces that come with it. So still calling in sponsors. If you want to, donate and get a pre-order, you can also donate. And, we're, the team and I are talking, like, if you donate a certain amount, you'll actually, it's like buy one and donate one. So we can also ensure that the book is reaching communities and libraries and schools, right? Because I really do have, this year's goal of getting into 1,000 homes. But really, I mean, my bigger mission is that honestly, every child would have a copy of this book so that we can, we, as in my team and I, with the Free to Be movement, really change the dialogue and change the conversation so that adults are not having to relearn, who they be and what makes them unique and what makes them feel free. They just get to grow up with that internal dialogue and that language and those beliefs. So they confidently head into, teenagehood and young adulthood and into adulthood, really being confident in who they are and not having to relearn this as an adult. So thank you. And I will see you on our next episode. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Unleashed Unstoppable podcast with your hosts, Alexandra Carter and Carol Register.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review and subscribe.
That's all for this episode, Wildly Ambitious Leaders. See you next week.